After the grammar lesson, we had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Hamel had new copies for us written in a beautiful round hand. So, the lesson in writing had to be done as exercise, a written exercise. So, the questions were probably on sheets of paper. I can think of a worksheet with a question written on top and lines to be filled up. Probably this is something that he does for the whole class. M. Hamel collects, has a lot of paper. He takes each paper and he writes a question on top, a composition heading on top, and it has to be completed by each student. He doesn't give the same topic, obviously. So here you have probably one topic which is Alsace, and the other topic which is France. So that is probably the reason why the words are as follows. That day M. Hamel had new copies for us, written in a beautiful round hand, France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They looked like flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom. Flags are symbolic of patriotic feeling. So when they looked at those pieces of paper with France or Alsace written on top, each student felt it is patriotic duty to write about Alsace and France. And that is probably the reason why this description is given. So the student France probably felt that it was a call to him by his country to write in praise of his country, and therefore he thinks of each sheet of paper as a piece of flag, as a flag fluttering from the top of his desk. It's probably just something that is kept on his desk, and maybe there is a slight breeze and the paper is fluttering, and it felt maybe there was a paper weight, like maybe there was a pencil on top or a pen on top, which probably served to appear like a flag post. Maybe I'm taking it too far, but I think the general drift is that he thought of it as, or the whole group of students, or maybe it is only himself, thought of it as something that helps them to showcase their love or patriotism for their country. They looked like little flags floating everywhere. In the school room. Note, school room, not classroom. School room. That is the reason why earlier on I said that probably it is just a one room school and everybody sat there to learn. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work. You should have seen, he says, how everybody sat and started working hard. And how quiet it was. You ought to have seen how quiet it had become, and everybody was passionately involved in the seriousness of the situation. More than what you teach in class, and the mood and the atmosphere which you generate in the class of interest and of passion communicates readily to the student. Probably the students began to realize that the task that they are doing is very serious, and they were doing their utmost to do it properly. And that is the reason why it was very silent. The only sound was the scratching of the pens over the paper. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest ones, as if that were French too. Note the point there. They were all doing what they were doing because it was connected with French, their language, which they're going to lose. And that is what, according to the narrator, gives importance or gives seriousness to the situation. Once, okay, that I read out. But nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest ones, who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that was French too. On the roof, the pigeons cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German? Bismarck was infamous for his absolute control over whichever place he dominated. And they felt that probably there was that feeling throughout France of how absolute he was in his control over people. And probably before they were actually under his rule, they resented that. And they thought maybe he'll go far enough, so far as even to make the pigeons sing in German if he could possibly do it. He always is, according to them, going a bit too far. Will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? Now, maybe the folklore connected with the sound of the pigeons is also associated here. Maybe the French people thought that when the pigeons made their characteristic sound, it resembled certain words in French, and maybe that is part of their folklore. Maybe that will get changed when German replaces French, if he is. When I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hemmel sitting motionless in his chair, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. Fancy. For 40 years he had been there in the same place, with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. That was the situation all through. And probably he's going to miss it a lot. And the sentence completes this way: garden outside the window and his class in front of him, just like that. Only the desks and the benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hopvine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. The desks and benches had become smooth because of 40 years of use. And the walnut tree in the garden outside the school, has been planted by probably the schoolmaster, and the hopvine that he planted himself, they seem to have been flourishing very well. They were representative of all the investment he had made in this place. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, to leave all that thing that he had paid attention to, that he had involved himself in, he had dedicated himself to all through his working life. Poor man, to hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks. Would it have been sad, he feels. Maybe that sadness was reflected in his face. So probably Franz picked up to see how M. Hemmel was taking it all. And this is his observation based on that glance. For they must leave the country the next day. They should leave. Confirms the fact that they're not going to be in Alsace-Lorraine hereafter. They are supposed to go away from that combined district, and they should go to the rest of France. For they must leave the country the next day. Next paragraph. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. That is, he had the ability to go through it the rest of the class, the rest of the working day, until the very last moment. After the writing, we had a lesson in history. This is not secular history, history of the saints. And then the babies chanted the ba, baby, boo, bo, bo, boo. Now, here in the place where I live, we add in our language, we add the consonant like ka, we add a consonant to the vowel in order to produce new letters. We have it as a part of our alphabet system. I believe that probably French too did something like that. They had their own letters stand apart, and when they wanted to, uh, when something more was required, or probably there were also letters which is associated with consonants and vowels together, forming syllables, and that those were the syllables that were being read out aloud. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser, who was waiting for just this moment, had put on his spectacles and holding his primer in both hands, reverently in all hope, spelled the letters with them. So it is referred to as letters. You could see that he too was crying, his voice trembled with emotion. And it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson. It was a very emotional movement. When we saw somebody else who must have finished his education long time ago continue his education from the point where he stopped, probably. Maybe Hauser was that man. When he had joined them in the recitation, the little kids in the recitation, there was that, mixed feeling. There was laughing at the joke of a man who is so old reciting what is meant for babies. At the same time, that sentimental thought that pervaded that room of sadness, of something that is lost and never to be brought back. All at once, suddenly, the church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus. This Angelus is probably the noon prayer that is sounded in the church, that is sung in the church, probably heard throughout that little village. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from drill sounded under our windows. Maybe that is the end of the day for the school, and probably one of the duties of the Prussian soldiers was to ensure that the order was followed. So after the drill, they made sure that the school closed by blowing the trumpet. And it was not done in a very open manner. It signaled actually the end of their drill. At the same time, it also signaled to the school that it should close down for the day. And sounded under our window. M. Hamel stood up, very pale, knowing that his moment has come, the moment of departure. In his chair, meaning in the platform, in the area where his chair was, probably pushing his chair a little back, he stood up on the platform, looking very tall and proud. I never saw him look so tall. My friends, said he, but something choked him. He could not go on. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could, Vive la France. And that means, long live France. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word, he made a gesture to us with his hand. School is dismissed. You may go. So he didn't say those words. He just gave a gesture that school was over and they could go. They would see him for the last time, and he couldn't stand that. It was a very emotional moment, and the lesson ends there.